This is no joke. Where did this sketch come from? It was drawn by an eyewitness. About 3 years before this photo was taken, this little girl, Patty Carson, saw the flying creature in eastern Cuba in about the year 1965. I'm Jonathan Whitcomb. Yesterday, March 13th, 2019, I learned that my friend Patty Carson had passed away. She was never on a radio or television talk show, to my knowledge. Comparatively few people knew about her shocking encounter with what appears to have been a non-extinct long-tailed pterosaur at Guantanamo Bay. Now, look at what happened 6 years later in 1971, another sighting of a strange flying creature at Guantanamo Bay. A U.S. Marine was taking a break one day when he saw 2 of them. Please consider his own words, quote, "Very close in range from where I was standing so that I had a perfectly clear view of them." Within minutes of his sighting, he drew this, quote, "They had a long tail trailing behind with a tuft of hair at the end. The wingspan roughly 10 feet, could have been 8 feet or 12 feet. I've interviewed Eskin by phone several times over a period of years. He's a real person and stands by his testimony of what he saw in 1971. He also said, "There is no mistaking what I saw. It was middle of the day during our free time, a work day. No booze, no drugs, bright sun, and full visibility." I've spoken with both of these eyewitnesses many times, and both of them convinced me that they were telling the truth. I submit these 2 sketches as evidence in cryptozoology for the existence of these flying creatures that have been seen by many other eyewitnesses in North America and in other areas of the world. Let's now compare these 2 drawings with open-mindedness. I see a difference in the depiction of the head crest. Look at it this way. What artist has a perfect memory? Why should 2 sketches be identical? These are not 2 photos of the same animal, but sketches from memory, maybe not even the same animal. I measured the distance from the center of the eye to the end of the head crest and to the end of the beak or mouth. In Eskin Kuhn's sketch, the eye is a bit closer to the end of the beak. In Patty's sketch, the center of the eye is about halfway between the end of the head crest and the end of the beak. I submit that this slight difference is well within the range of error that we can expect from 2 gifted artists who have depicted from memory what they remembered of a real encounter with a real animal. The sketch drawn by Patty Carson shows many small teeth. Why does the sketch by Eskin Kuhn show no teeth? The 2 flying creatures seen in 1971 were flying apparently with their mouths closed. Most of Patty's observation of the apparent pterosaur in 1965 was in those seconds while it was standing in tall grass. In addition, Patty seems to have been closer to the animal than Mr. Kuhn was to the 2 that he saw flying. In the earlier sighting, after the creature flew away, Patty ran home to tell her family that she had seen a dinosaur. Consider her own words on what then happened. "They all pooh-poohed me and started to tell me it was a pelican or frigate bird. No way! It was as tall as a man when it stood up on his haunches. It was close. It froze for a few seconds, so I got a good look. When we were kids, we lived in Arlington. Dad worked in the Pentagon, and we would often go to the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History, and when I saw it, I knew exactly that it was a pterodactyl, and even named it as such to my family. They didn't believe me. I know what I saw. I know exactly what I saw." Wait. Hold on. Stop. You probably need some background on this. Where is it coming from and where is it going? I think you now get it that 2 persons have been convinced that they saw a pterodactyl, or 2, at Guantanamo Bay in the middle of the 20th century. But those creatures are also called, by some people, flying dinosaurs. And we've been told all our lives that dinosaurs all became extinct many millions of years ago. In the year 2003, I was an independent forensic videographer, working for attorney firms, mostly in Southern California. A man from Texas sent me videos he had recorded of natives in Papua New Guinea who had seen large flying creatures. Those men and women may have seen something like a pterosaur, apparently, in those tropical islands of the southwest Pacific. Papua New Guinea has some of the most remote and unexplored jungles in the world. In 2003, I assumed that this would be a likely place for pterosaurs to live, if they have survived anywhere on the earth. In other words, maybe in a remote jungle, but no other place in the world. Keep in mind that this was long before I knew about the sightings in Cuba by Carson and Eskin Kuhn. By early in 2004, I had heard about 3 Americans who wanted to search for living pterosaurs in Papua New Guinea. They were planning for an expedition in 2004, and I soon determined that I wanted to be a member of the team. To make this a brief explanation, I did go on an expedition in Papua New Guinea later in 2004, but I was the lone American. 2 of the others, David Wetzel and Garth Guessman, went on a separate expedition a few weeks after I had explored part of Umboy Island. Yet those 2 expeditions on Umboy Island were not such a fool's errand as people in Western countries would suppose. We were not depending only on what a few natives had said about the Ropen of Umboy, also called Duus by other natives. A bit earlier in 2004, I had communicated with 3 other eyewitnesses, 2 Australians and 1 American. Consider now the testimonies of the 2 Australians. But first, let's take a brief look into the diversity to be found in Australia, including geography. Then we'll dive into a sighting report from Perth. This is what I used to think about Australia, the arid outback. Yet this continent has much more than desert environments. This continent has a variety of habitats. Suppose, for the sake of argument, that one species of pterosaur had survived into modern times. Also, let us suppose that the animal became uncommon and came out only at night, mostly. If this species of pterosaur continued to grow throughout life, only a few of them would become very large. That means the really big ones would be rare, perhaps very rare. That means people would almost never see the biggest ones, since the species was nocturnal. But when a person did see a big one, how would that person report the encounter? Who would believe such a thing? I suggest that under those conditions, few eyewitnesses would report an encounter with what looked like a gigantic dragon. I'll get to the point. This is more than just theoretical. Before my expedition in Papua New Guinea, which was in September and October of 2004, I started an email correspondence with a lady in Australia. She and her husband decided to be anonymous, so I'll call them Mary and John. Here's part of what she told me. Whatever people may think, the fact remains that my husband and I both saw that creature. My husband, being a scientist, took in things from the sighting that I was far too amazed, stunned, to take in. We have speculated much on what it was that we saw and still do not come up with answers, but we do know that it was definitely a living creature, 100% alive, and I would swear that before God himself. It was very big. We would not have been able to see what it was if the ground lighting had not lit its underside. We could clearly see it coming and stood rooted to the spot watching it as it drew closer. As it came to a point to the right of us and above, the ground lighting lit it up, and that was a stunning moment for the both of us. I was so totally shocked, amazed, awed, and bewildered at the same time. This was completely out of the reality I had grown up to know. And I can tell you in all honesty, it has changed me. I never believed these things existed until that night. The following is part of what the husband told me. We had been walking in the evening and had just crested a hill and were on the downslope along a major thoroughfare. In the distance, I perceived an object in the sky. At this point, it was rather indistinct, and wondering what it might be, I watched it as it approached. Soon I was able to determine that it was some sort of flying creature, and my first thought was that it must be some very large bird. Its progress had brought it closer, and while its shape did resemble a bird, I thought it must be the largest bird I had ever witnessed. It had reached our position and was about 250 or 300 feet above us, and slightly inland. The area was moderately well lit, and I saw that it seemed to be a light reddish tan color. It did not appear to be covered with feathers, but had a leathery texture. Soon after it passed us, it flew over a more brightly lit sports area, which highlighted even more the leathery appearance, also bringing more detail to view. The wings were the most definite leathery feature. They were shaped in a triangular arch, similar to a very elongated shark fin. The body also still appeared leathery, though textured, as though possibly covered with fine hair or small scales, the distance preventing any finer observation other than that it was a slightly different texture than the wings. I estimated the size to be in excess of 30 foot, possibly as great as 50 foot. Those are the words of a scientist, a man who did not mention any words like flying dinosaur or pterodactyl or pterosaur, but whose description of this flying creature makes it obvious to me that it was no bird or bat known to science. Now let's very briefly consider the sighting by Dwayne Hodgkinson in 1944, an encounter that he and his army buddy had north of Australia, near the town of Finchhaven, New Guinea. That animal, when they first glanced over to the other side of the jungle clearing, they had first assumed was a bird, for it flapped its wings as it ran to get up off the ground. But it took only a couple of seconds or so for the truth to become obvious. It was no bird, for it was the size of a small airplane, and it had a long horn-like head crest and a tail that Hodgkinson estimated was at least 10 or 15 feet long. The testimonies of the Perth couple and of Dwayne Hodgkinson strengthened my resolve to search diligently for the Ropen of Umboy Island. To be brief, I was able to interview several important eyewitnesses, and the other two American explorers also interviewed important eyewitnesses of the Ropen. We three explorers never got any good daylight view of that flying creature, but we returned to the United States convinced that not all pterosaurs are extinct. Over the years since 2004, I've written a scientific paper for a peer-reviewed journal, a number of books, and countless web pages and blog posts on sightings of these wonderful non-extinct flying creatures. I've received hundreds of eyewitness sighting reports, mostly firsthand, from the brave men and brave women who have seen the animals. Many of the sightings have been in the United States. Please subscribe to this channel so you won't miss future videos on the sightings.